All right, finally, let us get into my favorite episodes of Voyager, the best of the best, the 10 rated episodes. Let's start with my number 18, Prime Factors. Now, this is the other episode I was talking about from season one that had that really strong sense of community. And in fact, I have to say even more so. Because I talked about this episode recently as well, because this is a great episode where, Voyager encounters an alien species. Now, unlike the later seasons of Voyager, they don't just immediately start trying to destroy them or eventually start trying to destroy them. Instead, they want them to feel comfortable. They want them to come hang out on their pleasure planet, kind of like Rise a thing, and I want to give you pleasure. And it was an interesting concept, and I love how even though they didn't try to destroy Voyager, they did have ill intent, or sort of. It was under the surface. They were very fickle. It was all about meeting new species because they're bored with their lives and they want to have some more enjoyment by bringing in something new. So it's a pretext that they want to help these other aliens, but really they just want their own lives to be enriched, because when it comes to actually helping Voyager return home, they're like, nah, that doesn't interest me, because it doesn't benefit them to help Voyager get home. But this was a great episode because it does start off as a simple sort of pleasure planet. Like, even Harry Kim is making nice with the woman, and Janeway, of course, is making out with that guy. But then it gets a bit more complicated when Kim's such a dork. Like, because this hot chick who obviously wants to make out with him takes him to this other planet so they can watch this beautiful sunset. And then Kim realizes that the planet is like thousands of light years from where they are. So this alien species has a teleporter that can instantly transport them like way across the galaxy. So Kim is like all excited and distracted. It's like, I have to get back to Voyager. I have to tell them this is exciting. Kim, stay and make out with the chick first and then return to Voyager. Just my advice. But anyway, so this device creates a huge divide, of course, between the crew, because the protector, the Italian guy, doesn't want to give this device to Janeway, and again, as I said, it's because of his own. It doesn't benefit him at all. Apparently, and this is something I find hard to believe, but whatever, let's just go with it. It's an easier concept to buy than the whole language of Darmok. But apparently, stories is in short supply, and stories is like a precious commodity to them. So Voyager has like a whole library full of like literature, stories from not just Earth, but you think of how much literature there is in Earth alone. That's rich, but they have it through hundreds of Federation worlds, and even non-Federation worlds. Like, they probably have Klingon literature as well, all in this, and they're willing to give all of this to the guy in exchange for the technology. But he turns it down because he doesn't really care, and he's being a dick. He just wants them to stay. So he is the official head of the government, but there's other people like the who are beneath him, who see this as a chance to improve their status. So it's like inner politics, and I love this part of it. As you get the inner politics of it, where he's willing to make the trade, but it wouldn't be official, and that's very un-Starfleet-like. So the word Janeway wouldn't go for it, and this is what creates the divide. And I love this. You place the inner sort of characters and politics within Voyager, which is a community itself, has B'Elanna and Seska. Now, Seska, I don't know at this stage. This is the episode I think was right before State of Flux, so the writers might have known she was a Cardassian by this stage. It definitely didn't earlier on, but since this episode came right before State of Flux, they might have known this. But anyway, Seska, very true to her Cardassian nature, says, let's do this, and sort of, she's like the devil whispering in B'Elanna's ear. It's like, go behind Janeway's back and do it. So she convinces B'Elanna to do it, so they're all on board with like trying to get this device so they can see if they can get back to home quicker. And it's funny is Carrie overhears them. Like Carrie and B'Elanna to this point were like had a very anti-relationship, and they don't like each other. And Carrie's resentful for B'Elanna getting promoted over him, but he's like, "Look, I don't give Maquis Starfleet. I don't give a fuck. I want to get home, and your plan will get us home quicker, so I want to help you do that." So that was great that these politics within the crew itself sort of crossed the Maquis Starfleet line. Like, that didn't matter. But it got even more interesting when they were, going to make the trade where they downloaded the library. And Tuvok comes, and they're like, "Oh, fuck, we're caught." And they're thinking, like, they're like children being caught by the principal. Like, "Oh, fuck, we're fucked." But Tuvok, just like, "Oh, I saw that you downloaded the library. Because when I went to do it, I saw you had done it first." And they were just like, "What?" And Tuvok actually wants to help them. And that was a curveball I did not see coming. And that had really great sort of implications. Now, this is the first season, so they can't get home already. I mean, I do think this episode would have been better had it been in a later season and they did actually get home. I talked about this in my Endgame video. This would have made a better finale, but of course you can't get them home in the first season. That's way too early. So, of course, the device goes wrong. But it's interesting that because Seska figures out that it needs the planet's unique sort of signature or whatever in order to operate. You think there might be another planet that's kind of has that same unique signature somewhere in the galaxy, but whatever. So they have to use it before they go to warp, or else it'll never work, which isn't something Tuvok is aware of, but they're not able to tell him because he's on the bridge, so they tried themselves, but then they realize it never would have worked, and it almost ends up destroying the entire ship. So then we get the scene where Janeway is dressing down B'Elanna, which is, you could tell, like, she's not angry, she's hurt. She's very hurt that these people going behind her back, and it gets even worse when she talks to Tuvok. She doesn't even dress him down, which I think is actually worse for Tuvok. I think if she was just, like, yelling at Tuvok, like, "Fuck you for doing this," that wouldn't have been as bad as what she actually did, which was to just say, "I can't trust you anymore. You've really hurt me." And she wasn't angry, she was just hurt. And that hurt Tuvok much more. And I love that. That speaks to the relationship. And it was just such a great, like, interpersonal, just all the interactions, not just those people, but all the interactions between the crew, like, you get other random crew members. It feels like a community. And it was just such a powerful character story. But, of course, season 5, 6, and 7, explosions, forehead aliens attacking, blah, 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 explosions. Whereas we lost the sight of great character stories, great non-violent, just aliens hanging out, but there's more complexity to them. So, great aspect of season 1. Anyway, let me get into my number 17, which is Life Signs. I put this as my number 1 favorite romance Star Trek episode, where some people were like, "Well, how can you say it's better than City on the Edge Forever?" To be clear, I'm not saying this is a better episode than City on the Edge Forever, which is in my top 5 all favorite of the entire Star Trek franchise. I'm saying this is a better romance. Looking specifically at the romance aspect of it, I think Life Signs is better, and it is one of my favorite Star Trek episodes. Because this is a very powerful story about this is early Doctor, and again, season 2 Doctor didn't get utilized as much as he should have, and he is slightly different than his later thing. But I actually like, because he's less sort of egotistical. He does come off a tad bit egotistical, but like season 7, his ego just knows no bounds and goes over the top. So I do think the story works better with season 2 Doctor, who's less sort of, and he's more awkward. And that makes sense for the Doctor's character journey, because this is early in his character journey, so he'd be a bit more awkward with social interactions. And he doesn't really know how to deal with the fact that he's falling in love. And it's an interesting concept. They take Vidians are aliens, they're seen as evil, but we see dynamic to the species, that they're actually, it plays in the fact that they're dying of this plague and how this has haunted their lives, and not all of them are just evil. And she even talks about how some people are desperate, and it's just like a small faction of their society, and that makes perfect sense. And I love the complexity to that, and that so it's a Vidian that's shown as the enemy that he actually falls in love with. But we see what the Vidians would look like if they weren't ravaged by disease and by plague. And I think this takes advantage. The Vidians are always an interesting concept to begin with, but the Voyager rarely takes advantage of the concept of what would we be like if we were ravaged by it. So what would any like normal civilization be like if they were ravaged by plague? And it plays out like the intricate, rather than just, oh, I want to steal your liver. It plays out the intricacies of that and how this would affect normal everyday people. And this episode speaks a lot to the value we place on beauty, on visual aesthetics, and how when they recreate her as a hologram, they recreate her as she looks without the disease. So we see what the Vidians actually would look like if they weren't ravaged by this plague. And so she thinks that she looks beautiful. And she develops a relationship with the doctor, but she thinks that he's in love with her physical appearance. But of course the doctor's not, because he's a hologram. He's learning. He has his own issues. He's learning to fall in love for the first time, which is the first for him. And I love the aspect of that episode where each character is so caught up in their own individual issues. Like the doctor didn't even consider her issues with how she appears, because he's just wrapped up in, oh, this is the first time I'm falling in love, which is so true to human interactions, that we're often really so wrapped up in our own issues that we don't really think to see how the other one perceives what their own issues would be. And it's great. It has some really funny moments too. Like, it shows how new the doctor is to this. And I love that scene when he's like, because Kes suggests that he just can tell her, but they're like in the middle of performing surgery, and he's like, oh, by the way, Dinara, I have feelings for you. I have romantic feelings for you. I wonder if you feel the same. And it just passes like that. It was so hilarious. And it makes sense that he would be so naive. But then, of course, Tom comes and tutors him and says, oh, you went about it the whole way wrong. I love that they get the interaction between Tom Paris and the doctor. It was really great seeing that sort of genuine relationship where he tries to, help a friend, and he says, no, you're going about it all wrong. That's why she rejected you. This is how you do it. And so we have this romantic setting. That was, so I really loved the romance. I think this is the best romance episode that we had in the Star Trek franchise. It was just totally bought the way that they played out. And of course the end was extremely powerful when she does try to kill herself, or like the holographic version of her tries to kill her real body, because she says, that's not me. I don't want to go back into that body because I'm used to being beautiful, and you're not going to love me if I'm not beautiful, which again has very powerful commentary on how we view our aesthetics. But of course the doctor says he doesn't care. He doesn't care what she looks like. She wants to love her. She wants her to live a long life. So then she does put her back in their body, and you see them dancing, and he doesn't love her any less. Very touching. It would have been more touching if she just didn't disappear. But again, as I said, she did make one more reappearance, which is great. But I suppose it makes sense that she couldn't actually go on Voyager, and she wouldn't really work as a long-term character, but still. I like the romance between these two. Anyway, let's get to my number 16, which is Memorial. Now, I did a full-length review for this video, and this episode is really polarizing. It's controversial, shall we say, because I think it's very powerful. It was always been one of my favorite episodes. So it starts off with Kim Neelix Chakotay and Harry Kim returning from a mission on Delta Flyer. And what's funny is the very next episode is Collective, and it's the exact same 4 people who are returned from a mission on Delta Flyer. So it's, I don't know. But anyway, so they return from a mission and they start hallucinating. They start suffering symptoms of PTSD of a war that they hadn't been in. No one's even heard of it. So no one knows why they're suffering this trauma. Neelix even goes as far as to pull a phaser on people in the mess hall and start trying to attack people. And Chakotay is going through, because he's a part of it too, he's going through his own issues, able to relate to him. But we find out the big reveal, and then when they get closer to investigate the planet that they came from, the whole entire crew starts going through the same thing, and we find out that I think it's towards the end of the episode they reveal it's a memorial that is reliving the events of this tragedy, this Holocaust, where there's these soldiers sent to evacuate a colony, but they were overworked and really tired, not really fit to do it, and something went wrong and they ended up killing everyone there and trying to cover up that they did it. And so the memorial exists to remind people of this so that we do not make the same mistakes. And this, I think, is a very powerful message, that we need to remember history. Those who don't remember histories are doomed to repeat it. And I actually personally, just on a personal level, think that is one of the most important messages in life and society, which I think society as a whole does forget about a lot of history, which is why we do end up repeating it. I think I read this meme once that said, those who remember history, who don't remember history are doomed to repeat it, and those who do remember history are doomed to watch as those who don't remember do repeat it. Whatever, I might have messed that up, but something along those lines. But anyway, the controversy in this episode comes in where a lot of people strongly disagree with Janeway's decision or the whole concept of the memorial, because at the end of the episode, Janeway, when she finds out about the memorial, she fixes it and resurrects and has it keep operating. A lot of people are very much against this because they see it as an assault, as people being forced against their will to relive and go through traumatic events that cause PTSD. And this is serious psychological damage that this machine is causing. And I can see that point of view, definitely. But the reason why, and I talked about this in my full-length review, the reason why I personally don't see it that way, and I actually very much agree with her decision. And this is kind of me maybe fansplaining a little bit because they're not very clear about this in the episode, but this was just my take of what was described, is that in the episode they said that the machine was malfunctioning. And so to me that kind of implied, and I think they implied this with a few lines of dialogue, that the reason why the crew was suffering through such traumatic PTSD is because the machine was not operating the way it should have been, because it was losing power. So I got the impression that if it was operating as it should have been, the memories of the effect would not have been so chaotic. Because part of what caused so much trauma is people had no idea why they were feeling this way, and it was coming in like bits and pieces, and they weren't getting the whole story. So I have, and this may just be my fansplaining, but I feel the episode was implying that if the machine was operating at full capacity, it would not be so traumatic. I mean, it would be a bit, obviously, because it's kind of the point, but it wouldn't be as, have people pull phasers on their fellow crewmates and try to kill them kind of trauma. And the other major thing that I think a lot of people overlook who are very against Janeway's decision is that she put a beacon in orbit that tells anyone passing by, it warns them of the effect, which I think this effect should have been there in the first place by the people who put it there, but it warns them. So therefore, it is not forcing anyone to do it against their will. They will be aware that this will be an effect. If they approach this planet and go anywhere near it, they have been warned that this will be the effect of them going there. So there, in fact, would be consenting. They'd be willing to do it. So that's, to me, that deflates the argument that it's forcing things against people's will. And which I think was smart of Janeway to do that. And I agree with their decision to honor that. It would be dishonoring to people to just destroy the memorial, let it die. Because, it is an important message to learn. And, yeah. So I actually very much agree with her decision to keep it running. So, because I do think that the way that because people have to consent because they've been warned, and also I don't think it would be as traumatizing when it's operating properly because they repaired it. Just my interpretation, maybe I'm wrong. But either way, I think it was a very powerful episode. Just the way it played out, having Janeway and Tom Paris and Chakotay come to terms in the trauma that they're suffering through these events, and it tells you the importance of remembering history. So, always one of my favorite episodes. Anyway, God, lots of good episodes. Let's get into my number 15, Nemesis. This is one of the most underrated episodes of the entire Star Trek franchise, in my opinion. This episode generally, I don't know if many people hate it, but a lot of people are like kind of toss it away as average. Well, I think it's one of the best. The writers who wrote this were very proud of this episode, and I think they deserve to be. It reminded me of a Black Mirror episode called Men Against Fire, which I guess I won't get into too much to spoil it, but I kind of spoil it just by comparing it to this episode. But very similar, but I actually like this episode better. I like Nemesis better. So I mean, a lot of people are off-put by the language that the people on the planet use. They go, "Oh, nullify." I'm not going to do the whole thing. They just talk really weird. And I don't know, like the writers thought it was cool to find an alien race that uses English differently, but really it's all being translated by Universal Translator, so shouldn't the Universal Translator just translate it to the way any normal English-speaking person would sound? But splitting hairs, whatever. I do think that the weird language thing is entirely necessary, but I do think that is way overshadowed by how powerful this episode is. I think the twist is superb. It's amazing that because we go through this journey with Chakotay, where he's on this planet by these aliens who seem to be innocent, who are being ravaged by this other alien species, and he has a Maquis. He relates this to the way the Cardassians treated the Maquis and how the Cardassians treat other races like the Bajorans. So he's able to identify, but he still, of course, at first tries to keep up his Starfleet ideals, but he's able to see these innocent soldiers fighting for their lives, fighting for their families, getting killed and slaughtered by these ravaged, savage beasts. And so eventually the Maquis in him gets better and he gets wrapped up, and so he wants to go fight them and kill them too. Then you find out the big twist is that he's being brainwashed, as that these aliens are not actually beasts. The ones that he's with are not actually innocent people fighting for the survivals. They're actually, we don't know for sure, but they're depicted by the other alien species as the aggressor, as they're the ones who are attacking and being savage, and they brainwash people to make them believe that the other alien, and the other aliens that are supposed to be the beast, they look like predators. They look like Nausicaans or whatever. They look like weird beast thingies, but you find out they're actually just normal people. And again, this is a lot like that Black Mirror episode. So they're actually just normal people, but that are not necessarily the aggressor. I mean, they say that they're the innocent victims, but can we really trust them? But at the very least, we know that they're not the ones brainwashing people and forcing them to fight in a war that's not theirs. That's the Voyager who are doing that. The ones that we were shown were the innocent victims, but that was all a lie. And that was so so powerful. And Chakotay was so brainwashed that he actually saw Tuvok as one of those beast thingies and couldn't even recognize Tuvok until he had to break through his programming. And that has, I love this. It has such a powerful message about modern day society, about recruitment tactics, about the way people view war, about how we always have to demonize the other, demonize the enemy as a villain, as the scum of the earth, and if we do this, like, people can point to us easy stuff like the Nazis because they did this. They demonized, Jewish people and other enemy nations as worse, as scum, as worse below, but that's too easy. It also relates to like modern times, where even like the way any Arabs were being demonized for the actions of just a few terrorist splinter groups and stuff like that. Of course, it's 90s, so it was a bit before that, but still relevant to those sort of messages, and just in general the way sort of propaganda works and indoctrination. And oh my god, it's just so good. And the episode itself, like, even within this universe of Voyager, like Chakotay's character journey has, even at the end, he realized he was used, he realized he was brainwashed, but he still cannot fight his instinct of thinking of that weird alien beast, as the enemy. And there's just such a powerful message. Anyway, let's move on to my number 14, which is Workforce. Great two-part episode of season 7, which apparently was originally meant to be in season 6, which makes sense because season 7 wasn't that great. But Workforce, I talked about this before. This is like two-part that was like most intense. I was like most afraid for the crew. It seemed like the most impossible situation that they'd ever been in, and how the hell are they ever going to get out of it? Because the crew had their memories erased and replaced with memories of being different people who want to go find jobs at the factory, and it's part of this conspiracy because there's a labor shortage. Now, the labor shortage plot point does seem a bit iffy, but overlook that. There's aliens who use this to make money, actually, and that's how I love it. It's not a government-wide conspiracy. It's an inner conspiracy within the government with just a few individuals. And I talked about this in my main review, that had it been a government-wide operation, then Voyager would have been fucked. The crew would still be on that planet working at that power plant, because the only way they were able to get out of it is with help from the other aliens who were not involved in this conspiracy. So without their help, they would have been fucked. And I think that's a very interesting aspect to the episode. And I love how, and we see the Doctor actually get to do his command hologram thing that was introduced in Tinker Tenure Dr. Spy, where he saves Voyager because he was the only one left. But then, of course, when Chakotay and Harry Kim comes back, Chakotay takes over, and the Doctor's being all egotistical. I want to be in command. And to be honest, I did find this a bit annoying at times, but most of all, I thought it was really interesting. And it was great how he and Kim learned to work together towards the end of the episode, and they actually learned to appreciate it. Again, it's kind of like Warhead. They learned to appreciate each other and see that they both had value in this situation. Now, I didn't buy how when Chakotay left to go on the away mission, when Harry and Doctor's like, who's in command? And Chakotay's like, oh, figure it out. He wouldn't say that. He would put someone in command, and Harry Kim specifically in command. No offense to the Doctor, but he's a doctor. He was just had this command hologram was just a subroutine thing. But anyway, I love that how there was only the four of them, and they were alone on Voyager in an impossible situation, trying to get back the crew who actively did not want to get back because they were brainwashed to hate space travel. And as far as they were concerned, these were invaders trying to snatch them, and they had to go through so much song and dance to get B'Elanna just to remember who she was. Now, with the rest, by the end of the episode, they get the help of the actual government, so it makes sense that they could get the rest of the crew without as much trauma as B'Elanna had to suffer through. But again, like, I love how it was just a conspiracy within that government that was perpetrating this, because it does portray them as they were doing it for money, because they were getting money from the factories by kidnapping, passerbying ships and wiping their memories, which makes it a lot insidious. It makes it make a lot of sense, and also a powerful commentary on the effect of greed. So I did like that. Anyway, we'll move on to my number 13, season 4 episode, Living Witness. I love this episode. A lot of people love this episode. It's a fan favorite. I think it's really good. It's not just an excuse to have show the Voyager crew being evil. Like, I think it's actually, some people are like, oh, why don't you just go to Mirror Universe or something? I think it's actually better than the Mirror Universe. I think it's a lot more inventive. In Mirror Universe, it'd be such an easy crux. Oh, let's just go to a parallel universe and have them be evil. But instead, the episode makes very powerful commentary, again, about the effect of history and how, like, diluted it can become over the years. And yeah, some of the stuff is very hard to believe, that they got some of the details so right and they had some other details like so wrong. Because they knew Chakotay's name and they knew all their names and they knew how they looked, but they had them like act like evil. Like, I did find it a tad bit hard to believe, but I still think it worked out very well. And I love the interaction between the museum caretaker and the doctor, and how I think his transformation, it was totally believable. I loved how he was, for his instinct was to think the doctor was lying. And that makes total sense, because if, if someone came back and said, oh, Hitler's actually a really nice guy, you'd be like, you're a liar, fuck you. But I think it makes total sense that he did believe him, because he is not an average day person. He is a historian. He's a scientist. He studied history. He genuinely wants to know what the truth of history is, even if that fights his instincts. And so I totally bought that his relationship that he formed with the doctor, and that he was willing to do what was best. And I love how by the end of the episode, the doctor realizes that he's just trying to clear Voyager's name the whole entire time, but he realizes what he's doing is causing race riots and race relations of that planet to rise. And he realizes, he sets his ego aside. Again, such an important thing for the doctor to do. He sets his ego aside and says, look, just deactivate me. Clearing Voyager's name is not important. Saving your world is. And that's such powerful. But even more powerful, the museum caretaker says, no, I will not do that. We can make things right by telling the truth, by staying true to history. We're going to fix this by being honest. And it's so heartwarming, such an emotionally touching ending, where they go jump another 700 years, and we find out the thing we're seeing with the doctor and the museum caretaker is another simulation, and the person from 700 years in the future will say, these are historical heroes, they're figures that saved our world and they stopped the race relations together, so that was an amazing ending. Now, the thing with having a doctor backup program, because this wasn't the actual doctor, there's specific moments in Voyager that contradict that there's no such thing as a backup. In fact, that there can't be such a thing as a doctor backup program for the doctor. But one can make the excuse, well, those are earlier episodes. Maybe they made one later, but they made it clear that they couldn't make one. But anyway, so that whole concept was really dumb, but you couldn't have an episode with that. It's still a great episode, what they did with it. Anyway, let's move on to my number 12, which is The Void. The Void, the Void, the Void. Avoid the Void. So I've said this many times before. This is what the entire show of Voyager should have been. It should have been the Voyager trapped in the Delta Quadrant, having to make alliances with other aliens, sticking true to the principles of Starfleet, and in fact making another version of the Federation as they go, and pulling resources with other aliens. Now, we didn't get that with the show, but at least we got it with this one episode, and the way the episode does it is really well. It really pulls it off in an amazing fashion, especially the way it begins with they're completely fucked, running out of resources, and they keeps, Chakotay is like, all right, our principles are well and good, but people need to eat. We're going to die. And that's reasonable. That's not unreasonable for him to say that and say, well, maybe we should resort to piracy, especially against these assholes who are killing other people. They kind of deserve it. And you can see his point of view. But I love how Janeway sticks to her principles. She sticks to the principles of Starfleet and actually manages to make it worse. And when they're at risk of dying, they manage to build strong alliances with some of them who are pirates themselves, and manages to convince them that there's a better way, that cooperation is better than every man for himself. And it was such powerfully done. And you get this other side plot with these, weird aliens native to the void. Let's avoid that. Let's just ignore that for a second because that's dumb. But anyway, aliens that are native to the void that communicate. The Doctor managed to communicate through music, which is really interesting. And Seven gives her a character journey as well, because she at first is like, well, why help people when it's not logical? And she ends up doing that herself when she helps these other aliens, and it's great. It was just a great Star Trek episode. Not just a great Voyager episode, but a great Star Trek. Like, it's so true to the principles of Star Trek, and so, I would hold this up. What is this episode that's most true to Star Trek themes? And this is up there. Anyway, let's get to my number 11, Eye of the Needle. Another season 1 episode. This is another one that was really early on. I think it was 5 or 6. Another one where you get a strong sense of community, a strong sense of the characters. And this is, again, the difference between season 1 and season 5, 6, and 7 is you don't get four-head aliens attacking the ship. You get a character-based, dialogue-based episode without any action or sex appeal. And it's amazing. And it's so great because Janeway, they find a wormhole to the Alpha Quadrant. It's a micro wormhole, so they can't fit Voyager in. They're able to communicate, but it's a Romulan. And I love that. Instead of being like, oh, Romulans are going to deceive you, they're going to be enemies. No, instead of doing that, Janeway manages to relate to this Romulan on a personal level and convey the kind of how they feel being stuck alone, trapped in the Delta Quadrant, and relate to him on this personal level. And it's so powerful, and I love the character interactions between them and the journey that they had between them. And by the end of the episode, this Romulan, this enemy, and he's still true to the Romulan people, enemy to the Federation, is still willing to help the Voyager, and he feels to them, he relates to them, and I totally bought it. And plus, the big reveal that he's actually 30 years in the past. Amazing reveal. Very fascinating sci-fi twist on this very personal character-based episode, making it worth its sci-fi element to it. So yeah, it's one of the more powerful episodes of Voyager, in my opinion. Anyway, we'll get to my number 10. Getting into the top 10 now. My number 10, this episode jumped a lot on my rewatch. I think I rated it as an 8 at some point. I think maybe a 9. But no, this is number 10, A10. And it's number 10 on my list. I'm not saying it was rated at number 9. I'm saying it was 9 out of 10. So it would be rated at 50. Let me just clear that up. Anyway, Prey. This is a great episode. I love this episode with the Erosion. This is the first time the Erosion were used right. They were really good. We get Tony Todd playing Erosion. And it's such a great character story for 7 to 9 because, the Erosion are hunting down species 8472, and they find out there's an alien, a member of species 8472, a species 8472, whatever you call it, on Voyager. And so at first they're like, oh, we need to, they're evil, right? So we need to hunt it down, we need to stop it from destroying the ship. But then they learn that it's just trapped in and wants to go home. It's trapped in this space. It wants to get back to Florida space, and it was being hunted by the Erosion. So we realized the Erosion are actually the aggressors, and it's just it's like a lost puppy that wants to get home. And so Janeway takes the Starfleet attack, the Federation, the true Federation principles. We're not going to harm it. It doesn't want to harm anyone. We're going to help it. It's trapped. The Rogans are the assholes. We just wanted to get home. And Seven does not see that point of view. She doesn't see how that's, and especially when they get, because first off, she has a bias against species 8472 because, they almost wiped out the Borg and she's scared of them. Well, she should be. I mean, and it's actually a legitimate argument, actually, that helping this member of this malevolent species that want to wipe out all life, not just Borg, but all life in the galaxy is maybe not the smartest thing to do. But I think it's totally true to the Federation principles that Janeway would want to anyway. Say, well, maybe that's how we better relations. But I can see Seven's point of view in this situation too. But it's absolutely amazing how it turns when one of the Erosion gets loose and ends up on the ship running around, like he stuns a couple people, and Seven has the chance to take him down when he's right there, and he relates to her. He's like, I see it in your eyes. I know you want me to kill this alien. You want it just as much as I did. And she does. She beams them both back to the Erosion ship. She gives up the species 8472, and that calls off the alien attack. So I love that. That's such a, I did not expect, like, a Star Trek episode usually does not go in the direction of, the Federation wants to save this harmless, well, he's not harmless, but his innocent creature is being chased and tortured, and it ends up that one of our heroes basically kills it. It's like, wow, did not see that coming. And of course she does it to save Voyager, because Voyager was about to be destroyed by a bunch of Erosion. So by doing that, she saves Voyager, and she justifies that. And I love how she sticks to her guns when Janeway tries to dress her down, and she restricts Seven, which is kind of somewhat referenced in the next episode, but it kind of goes away pretty easy. But she restricts Seven of a lot of privileges because she sees this as a huge betrayal. She defied orders. But Seven's just like, what do you want of me? I saved the ship. We'd be dead if I didn't do this. I mean, you're up there on your high horse saying how we should stick to Federation principles, but you'd be dead if it wasn't for what I did. And that's such great, like, moral ambiguity, and such great. And I love it how a lot of people complain about a lot of Star Trek episodes that say, this is how you should think. Here, this is how you should think. So it's rare when you get episodes that don't tell you how to think, that leave it really ambiguous and open to you what to think. And I just thought it was done really well. Anyway, let's get to my number 9, which is Blink of an Eye. This was the highest rated episode on IMDb, so it's a fan favorite. It's always been one of my favorites. I think it's a very strong episode of season 6. And most of the episode takes place like on this planet without any, so most of it has to do with the guest stars, and some people complain that the guest actors aren't really that great. I think they're fine. I mean, they're maybe not be the best, but they're passable. I think the story outshines any issues, although we do get Daniel Day Kim at the end of this episode, who's really good. So there's that. He's a really good actor. Daniel Day Kim, of course, played Jen on Lost, and he's been in some other things as well. But anyway, this is a really fascinating sci-fi story. Now, some people say, oh, it's ripped off of this book called Dragon's Egg, but really that book is, it's just the initial, I've talked about this before, it's just the initial concept. The book is, this episode is different enough. I mean, every idea comes from somewhere. Just because the concept is kind of not used that much this season, it was not a ripoff. But anyway, it's very fascinating that we see the whole, like, planet evolve and create a mythology around Voyager, and this is something we didn't really see in Star Trek before, and it was a very unique take on it, and how Janeway and the crew dealt with this, as towards the end of the episode, she would rather let them destroy Voyager than do them any more damage than they had already done, because they were causing like massive earthquakes and geometric forms for what for them was just a couple of weeks, but on the planet it was centuries. And so that even millennia, I believe. So that was absolutely fascinating. And of course, seeing the relationship Janeway forms with Daniel Day Kim's character, who's astronaut who comes up, that was really touching. And how he realizes, like, he finds out the truth of this mythology that his species has pondered over for centuries of what it is, and he realizes that they're just kind people who are trying to get home. It was just really touching, like especially the final scene where we see him sitting on the planet as an old man, which for Voyager, of course, was just a couple hours. And they finally repair their engines and warp away, and he sees them fly away. I mean, such a powerful, subtle ending. Anyway, let me get into my number 8, which is Remember. Third season episode, which I talked about this in my review of the third season. The only reason this episode is good is because most of the other episodes in third season this time sucked. The only reason it was good is because this was a Next Generation script. It was a finished, ready-to-shoot script. But I don't, of course, I've never read this script. I wouldn't know what the Next Generation version of this episode would be like, but I imagine it would not be as good as this episode because it had Counselor Troy in the main part. And I think it works so much better having B'Elanna Torres, because Troy is a sympathetic character to begin with, whereas Torres is sort of harder to convince. She's more volatile and whatnot. So I think that actually played better to the story. Now, this is another powerful episode about the power of propaganda, which I think works very well. How there's been a genocide where this alien, the aliens are visiting Voyager, has telepathic abilities. And, the start of it does come off really very Next Generation, especially when, like, Janeway's in the... I even thought this before I knew it was a Next Generation script, like, when Janeway's in the mess hall and they're hanging out with the aliens. Like, that's something Next Generation, like, in its 5th season did all the time. So I think I'm pretty sure this was a 5th season episode. But anyway, regardless of that, that was such a... we get this powerful message, because we find out that there was a genocide that took place like 50 years ago or something on the planet, and they sort of hit it like during the time that's like, oh, we're just relocating these aliens, or this, it was a splinter group who didn't like technology. We're just relocating them to another colony, don't worry. And then when they all died, they're like, they made up the lie. Oh, it's because they're unsanitary, because we have to be sanitary. We have to believe in technology. So basically, this is a race of germaphobes, which I think was a pretty interesting concept, too. So there was a splinter group who weren't germaphobes, and they didn't want to use technology. So the main society saw them as a threat, so they wiped them out. They killed them all. They did a genocide, but they framed it as if it was relocation. They said, "Oh, we're going to relocate you," but really they were killing them. And so one of the aliens had one of the women. She was like a young woman at the time, had an affair with one of the guys in the splinter group, and so she let her father convince her eventually, because her father made up lies about him cheating on her, which was what threw her over the top, that he was unsanitary and that they didn't eat. Of course, his father didn't admit that they were killing them. He said, "That's ridiculous. We're not killing them. We're just sending them to a colony." And the father, by the way, was played by the guy, who's from the X-Men. He played the senator in the first X-Men movie. He's a really good actor. He was amazing in this role. A really despicable guy. The character, not the actor. The actor just did a good job of playing a despicable guy. But anyway, he convinces her, this woman, to let them die. And then years later, she realizes that this was a genocide and that it was covered up, and that the guilt she must feel for allowing someone she loved be killed. And sort of get that though, because there's a split between her and her father. But anyway, she relates these memories to B'Elanna through her telepathic abilities, which are convenient for the plot. But anyway, which was very powerful. It was a really good journey. It was to set up to see this information related through the episode, and of course, while she's telling B'Elanna about this, one of the other aliens realizes what she's doing and kills her, but makes it look like an accident. And of course, they feign, oh, we're not this. And the ending was great because it ends on a somewhat ambiguous note, because B'Elanna goes to one of the younger aliens and be like, look, share my memories. You can have the memories she gave me. It will tell you everything. And that's how the episode ends. So we don't know if anything ever comes of that. If you think, it's probably a slow movement. But I like the message because it's, I don't know, to me it's partly things that you think of as conspiracy theories, and things that are, this is unlikely, or culture would never do this. Sometimes you need to open up your mind a bit more, and sometimes you have to be aware that the power of propaganda, and that's basically a propaganda thing. They had this genocide and they covered it up. So I thought it was a very powerful, very emotionally well done. Anyway, let me get to my number 7, which is Resistance, a very, very powerful season 2 episode. Now, a lot of the episodes kind of typical about, I don't know if any of it was typical, because it actually deals with Voyager running low on resources and being desperate to get resources, so they have to go deal with a resistance group of this planet. And of course, this puts them at odds with the main authoritarian government there. So Tuvok and B'Elanna get arrested, and Tuvok gets tortured. So this is pretty dark. But Janeway gets separated from them, but she's trapped on this planet trying to get back to them. And she comes across this guy who helps her, but he's kind of crazy. He thinks that Janeway is his daughter. And at first I was like, oh, this is pretty dumb. But what they do with this was so powerful. It was because we find out, because throughout the episode we're just missing this guy. It's just some crazy old man. Look at that stupid crazy old man. But you find out that his daughter and his wife were killed by this authoritarian society because they were part of the resistance, and he refused to help them. And in fact, by refusing to help them, he basically let them die. So this thing of why he thinks staying with his daughter is like a defense mechanism to hide from the fact that his wife and daughter were dead, and it's kind of his fault. And by the end of the episode, he gets killed, and right before he dies, Janeway says, "Yes, I am your daughter, and I forgive you." Oh my God, that brings a tear to my eye every time I watch that. This is one of the most powerful, effective endings of any episode, any Star Trek. I don't know why this episode is not appreciated more. I think it's really underrated. Anyway, speaking of emotionally powerful episodes, we're really getting into this. Let's get into my number 6, Detrell. Now, Detrell on its own, sometimes I think, why do I have this episode rated so high? It's kind of just a lesser version of Duet. And they did admit, because it was the penultimate episode of season 1, so they did admit, Duet was the penultimate episode of season 1 of Deep Space Nine. That was loved and celebrated, so let's try to do something here. So sometimes I think, this is just a lesser version of Duet. But it's not just the story, because the main story is about Neelix and coming across this guy who invented the atomic bomb. The Tetrion thing, the weapon that destroyed, killed, a weapon of mass destruction that killed thousands of his fellow Talaxians and allowed his people to take over Talax. And so he has to confront him. And so it has a lot of analogies to, of course, the atomic bomb and stuff like that, and the people who created it, and how it deals with how he's regretted it ever since, and how he's trying to save Talaxians' lives in order to make up for it. Of course, Neelix is like, well, fuck you. I don't want to help you ease your conscience. It can totally relate to Neelix. Now, even that, even though, as I said, even that story, that basic storyline, I love it and I think it's great, but that on its own, I think, well, it's just a lesser version of duet. But that's until you get into the way this Neelix's character story work played out in this episode, which I thought was amazing. And I said this before, this is one of the best episodes that showcase how great Neelix and Kessa's relationship worked, because it was so fascinating the way how he tried to protect her, but she ended up like saying, don't block me out, you don't need to protect me, and she ends up comforting him and making him realize that he did the right thing, because apparently we realize a lot of this anger he holds towards this person has to do with the fact that he feels guilty over the fact that he was a conscientious objector, and that's why he wasn't there when the weapon went off, because he was hiding from military draft because he disagreed with the war. And this sort of implies that the Alexians were kind of in the wrong, that they were kind of the aggressors, and that he stood on principle that this wasn't the right thing. And so that was so powerful, and that he regretted, he felt guilty about that. And it was so powerful to see Kess comfort him and make him realize that it was a smart thing. And also, like, the dream sequences I talk about in this episode are also really amazing. How I love the dream sequences in this episode, how he's haunted by this, and it's just telling him, like the thing with the pool table, and you know, he sees the enemy, he's being a dick, but he has Neelix's voice. But then at the end of the sequence, he actually is Neelix. He realizes that he's the one he's, you know, most angry at himself, and he's projecting it onto this other person. And the other, Detrell, actually has his own issue. Like he lost his mother, he lost his whole family, he's dying, and he literally tries to bring the Talaxians that he killed back to life. And that was just so heartbreaking. It was so powerful that he failed, and how he felt like he was a failure, but Neelix on his deathbed forgave him, and that was just very powerful ending. Anyway, let me get into my number 5, which is Timeless. So, Timeless is a great episode, and this is an episode that gets higher and higher on my list each time I watch it. I think at first I was thrown off by this episode because I found it very disorientating, the way it just throws you into it, and you have the storyline, because the episode begins with Voyager being destroyed, which I think I would put that intro, because people say, oh, the teaser of Cause and Effect when the Enterprise is destroyed was the best teaser ever. I'd say no. This is much better. The teaser begins with Voyager just... I actually know it doesn't show it being crashed. The teaser begins with future Harry Kim and future Chakotay going to this ice world, and you find it's Voyager is destroyed. That was so powerful. However, I was against the fact that when we do go back to present day, they have this like slipstream drive, which was introduced at the end of season 4, but they're like having these celebrations, like, oh, we're ready to use it. I'm like, well, it would have been nice if we had some build off. I felt disorientated because the previous episodes weren't building. They could have easily had a couple lines, a couple scenes being, hey, we're building this, you know, slipstream drive to try to get us home. So when they were all of a sudden celebrating, that felt a bit fake. Plus, the celebration was a bit premature because Paris learned that it would have destroyed them if they tried to use it. I'm like, well, you think that's something they'd figure out before they threw this big celebration. But anyway, I love the scene where Seven gets drunk. That was amazing. I love that scene. Anyway, we find out she's very sensitive to synthahol. But the main episode is about, and this is another great use of Harry Kim, great use of Garrett Wang, where the future Harry Kim has this riddle with regret because he feels responsible for Voyager's destruction, because he was relating, you know, the Chakotay and Harry Kim were in Delta Flyer flying above, you know, ahead of Voyager in the slipstream drive, and they were relating the coordinates of how they could do it safely, but he related the wrong coordinates, and Voyager ended up getting destroyed. And so he felt responsible, and the whole thing was about this future version of Harry Kim trying to undo the timeline. It's so powerful, and I love his interactions with the Doctor in the future. Has, you know, the Doctor is from the present times, and he was just like, you know, stop wallowing in your self-pity and actually do something to help Voyager. And I love the way that the future scenes with Harry, Kim, and Chakotay were intercut with the present stream scenes of the slip. So we see the story of the slipstream drive. And that scene we get with the Voyager actually crashing into the planet. I mean, god damn. That was so intense, so well done. And of course, the ending of the episode was just amazing. It was such a moment of redemption to see Harry Kim, like future Harry Kim, yell yes as he screams, as he finally sends out the coordinates to save Voyager. Now again, in a typical Voyager fashion, like future Harry Kim's motivation was to get Voyager all the way home, but he realizes, well, that's not going to work, so we have to just find a way to knock him out of the slipstream drive so they won't get home, but at least they won't be destroyed. Which again is typical Voyager. I think this would have made a better episode than in-game. Way, 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 way better. Of them getting home. And they should have just gotten home and had Season 5, the rest of Season 5, 6, and 7 take place in the Alpha Quadrant. Or maybe have this episode in Season 6 and have them... But whatever. Or save it for the finale and have them get home in the final episode. But anyway, this would have been a much, 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 infinitely better way for them to get home. Because this was just such a powerful episode. But anyway... Now we're really getting into it. Number 4. My number 4 favorite episode of Star Trek Voyager is Scorpion. I like this episode better than Best of Both Worlds. I've kind of implied this before. I did a top 10 Borg episodes. This was ranked higher in Best of Both Worlds, but I never outright said it. Now I'm going to outright say it. Now, it is true I don't like Best of Both Worlds as much as most people do. I still think it's a great episode, but I just don't think it's one of the best. Scorpion, I do think it's one of the best. And I am aware that it was trying to emulate Best of Both Worlds in some cases. But I just think it does such a better job with the character stories. And particularly, because it's not just, there's this flashy story about this introduction of Species 8472, which were invented as an alien even worse than the Borg. And I love how they don't focus too much on them. They focus on them enough, but the main focus is the Borg. So they're more of a plot device, but they don't come off as just, they're developed enough that they seem worthy to be there. But anyway, the main flashy story is about this huge, we see in the intro, you want to talk about a great teaser. The teaser for this episode is 30 seconds long. It's just, we are the Borg. It shows 12 Borg ships, and then it shows them getting destroyed. Holy fuck. Talk about a teaser. And so then we get the flashy stories basically about this war between the Borg and the Species 8472, where the Borg are getting destroyed. They're getting wiped out. But then the Voyager crew learned that Species 8472 want to wipe out all life in the galaxy. So then wiping out the Borg, not necessarily a good thing. And so it's the whole thing. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so Janeway comes up with a plan to make an alliance with the Borg. And oh my god, this was so intense. And I love from the very beginning, Chakotay was against this. And he had good reasons to be. But of course, he's the first officer, not the captain. So we get this conflict. And this is a great character story in this episode. We get the conflict between Janeway and Chakotay. With Chakotay, they're constantly battling each other, and how the episode's resolved at the end is the two of them realize that they need to stop fighting against each other. Even though they disagree, even though they have different ways to go about it, they need to come together. And it's not just Chakotay saying, obeying his captain and going completely to Janeway's side. It's also Janeway meeting him halfway and saying, and I think that's an important character trait for her, because most captains will say, I'm the captain, do whatever the fuck I want, but it's her acknowledging that Chakotay does have legitimate concerns, but she has legitimate reasons for doing what she's reasoned to, and that he needs to realize that as well. So they need to come together. So they come together by the end of the episode, come up with a great plan, because first of all, they go ahead and defeat Species 8472 like they had agreed to do with the Borg, but then predictably, very predictably, just like Chakotay predicted would happen, the Borg try to betray them, and once the Borg don't need them anymore, the Borg's like, okay, fuck you, we're going to assimilate your ship now. But they planned for that. They knew that was going to happen. They worked together. They find a way to distract Seven of Nine and save the ship. So it was amazing. Not only was it a super intense episode, suspenseful throughout, you also got that amazing character story. It's the best Captain First Officer character story in the entire Star Trek franchise, in my opinion. And on top of all of that, you get the introduction of 7 of 9. Now, I talked about this before. When I first heard they were introducing a new character in the second part, I was like, oh, this is going to suck. The second part's going to not fit at all in the first part. It's going to feel like just, oh, we're introducing this new character. It did not come off that way at all. They seamlessly introduced this new character in a way that fit perfectly into the episode. Now, they did, in fact, say that the introduction of 7-9 was actually planned when they were writing Scorpion Part 1, so maybe that's why it works so seamlessly. The only reason they waited till Part 2 to introduce her was casting, because they wanted to have the whole summer to find the perfect actress to play 7. They didn't want to rush to casting and have it done by the end of season 3, so that makes kind of sense. But they knew from the beginning that that's where this two-parter was leading to the introduction of a permanent Borg character. So I think that helped them plan it out a lot better, and so it played out like really great way to introduce this character. She's a villain. I already talked about the gift, which really further fermented her introduction. Had the episode Raven that was slightly later in the season, but again, handled really well. Okay, so let me get to my number 3. Speaking of the Borg, this I've said before was my favorite Borg episode of all time, and I'm standing by that. It's one of my favorite episodes in the entire Star Trek franchise. That is the season 5 episode, Drone. I think what I love most about this episode is it totally subverted my expectations. Now, this episode and my number 2, you have a lot of people complaining about the science used. And I grant you, they were very thin ice with their scientific reasoning in this episode. But I say, like, some people apparently let that interfere with their enjoyment of the show. Now, people could say the same thing about me with continuity. How I let a lot of continuity errors and grievances and interfere with my enjoyment of episodes like Dark Frontier. But I guess, everyone has their different perspective. Maybe some people are more willing to let continuity go, and I'm more willing to let the technology thing go. But here's the thing, though, with the scientific accuracy. If you're watching Star Trek for scientific accuracy, then you're watching the wrong show, my friend. Star Trek, especially the original series, my fucking God, never been a show about scientific accuracy. To me, it's borderline, like, it's science fiction technically, but it's borderline science fantasy. It's not really about, like, accuracy. It's more about the metaphors, the storytelling, the character stories. So if you're watching Star Trek for scientific accuracy, I think you're in the wrong place. But so that's why I'm able to look at, like, Drone in particular, like the science. It was like the 7's nanoprobes combined with the Doctor's hollow emitter from the 29th century to create a 29th century Borg. 100% sure that's not how that would work, but I don't care because it comes up with a really great character story. This is probably the best character story of 7 of 9. This was executed so well because at the start of the episode, we see 7 practicing how to smile, and she's trying to connect more with emotion. I love how when the Doctor walks in, she hides the fact, and she outright says, "I'm annoyed that you just come in here without knocking." And at the end of the episode, she suffered this traumatic occurrence, and we see her again looking at the mirror, and she can't smile. Oh, my God. That, I cannot think of a more emotionally powerful ending than that. Now, in between, we get the storyline of this Borg drone, who apparently is played by the same actor who played the evil Nazi guy in The Killing Game, which I just found that out. I thought that was pretty interesting. I thought I recognized him, but interesting, he plays a totally different character now. But anyway, this 29th century Borg, and again, let's overlook his shady origins, but I love how, and this is another thing I love this episode for so much, is that it so subverts expectations, because the expectations I had were, okay, we have he's going to be evil. We have this, Borg from the future, and he's going to turn out to be evil. Now, to me, that would have been so predictable. In fact, the Deep Space Nine episode, The Abandoned, kind of did this when Odo was taking care of her baby Jem'Hadar. It turned out he was trying to make it good, but turned out he couldn't because it was in his nature to be evil. And so if they did that, I didn't necessarily hate that episode, by the way. I did like it. But if they did that here, I think that would be repetitive. That would be dumb. Oh, it's a Borg. It's going to be evil. Nothing you can do about it. Now, I think it was so much more powerful that they actually were able to make this drone see the errors of the Borg and how make him value Voyager. In fact, he wasn't even made aware of the Borg until towards the end of the episode. So even towards the end, there was this error. You were afraid that he's going to be like, nah, fuck you, I want to return to the Borg because I'm Borg. I love that didn't happen. And a lot of that had to do with the strong connection that he had with 7 and 9, who was basically his surrogate mother. And to have that strong connection there, and the way it played out between the two of them, the character journey they went through this episode was absolutely amazing. And most of all, the ending. Oh my God, this really brings tears to my eyes. Where he sacrifices himself because he knows that the Borg will always keep coming for him as long as he's on board the ship. And Seven's like, don't worry about it. We'll find a way to beat them. She's like, no. Voyager will be in danger. More specifically, you, Mother, will be in danger, and I cannot be responsible for your death. So he refuses to let the doctor operate on him and dies. And it's so powerful, especially the way 7 says, you must comply. You're hurting me. And this is a callback to earlier in the episode where he grabs her, and she says, you're hurting me, so he lets go. So he tries again. She's like, you're hurting me, to try to get him to stop. But he simply says, you will adapt. And of course, that's Borg terminology. But I love the way they use the Borg terminology here. And she does adapt. Of course, she does learn to get over his death, but it was definitely a powerful moment for her. And I think it's played off, as I said, amazingly well in that final scene of her looking in the mirror. Anyway, okay, so now we're coming down to it. Let me get to my number 2. Deadlock. I think this is the most underrated episode of the entire show. It's my second favorite. And I think my number 1, which you probably know what it is, but that's appreciated a lot more. This episode, most people were just like, again, they let the science, this is not scientifically accurate. Who cares? I'm sorry, this is Star Trek. So this episode is about the Voyager going into this weird spatial thingy, and it gets split into 2, where there's a duplicate Voyager, a duplicate crew, but they share the same supply of antimatter. And so one of the versions of Voyager is getting bombarded, destroyed by the other one, who's trying to compensate for the loss of antimatter. So they're doing these pulsars. It's like completely destroying it. We see this is when Ensign Wildman gives birth to Naomi Wildman, I don't think she's given a name in this episode, but she's given birth to the baby, and the baby dies. Harry Kim dies. He's blown out into space. And so this was amazing. This is like, again, I think it's way better than like Cause and Effect, where we see the crew like die. And at this point, you don't really know what's going on. You don't know there's a duplicate Voyager, but then you get hints. You flip over to the duplicate Voyager, and they see like images of the other Voyager, and they're fine. And at first you're like, what the hell is going on? So the way they laid this out was so well done, so beautiful. And then you have the 2 Janeways who actually have to come together, and you get 2 Captain Janeways talking to each other. It's an iconic scene, in my opinion. Absolutely loved it. And again, and this is another, like, I guess season 2 really started to build Janeway's suicidal tendency, because one of them was like, the one who had a damaged ship was like, okay, I'm going to destroy my ship so your ship can live. And the other one's like, no, we have to find a way. And it's so true to Janeway, because you realize that is how she would react in both situations. That the reason why she has a different disposition than the other version of herself is because they're in a different position. position. And eventually at the end of that conversation, the one says, well, come on, I'm going to do this. You know why, and you know that I will do it because she is the same person. It was such a great interaction. Absolutely loved it. But what made this episode so good was the ending where the Vidians come. And the Vidians were hinted at earlier in the episode that there were a threat in this area. And they come, they see Voyager in this weakened state. And they come to board it and they start, like, you know, killing everyone and harvesting the organs and completely taking over the ship. But they are taking over, they only noticed the one version of Voyager, the one that was not damaged. And so I love that. I think if you've seen the promo for this episode, it kind of ruins it a bit because it's kind of, the promo is like, which copy will survive? It will surprise you. I'm like, that's kind of spoiling the ending there, asshole. But luckily, hopefully, you know, most people hadn't seen that original promo for it. So yeah, that was amazing seeing the Vidians board Voyager and the music, the way it was shot and the music, and just seeing like Tuvok and Tom Paris being hunted down and murdered. God, I'm a stickler for episodes where the crew gets killed and the ship gets destroyed, which I'll get into more in my number one. But yeah, and I just think the way that played out was so, and it wasn't like a parallel universe. It wasn't a timeline that was erased. There were actual versions. And the fact that they had the Harry Kim and she took the baby from the Voyager that was killed by the Vidians and went over to the other one that was damaged because the Harry Kim there died, so that they wanted to balance things out. So that was fascinating. At the end of the episode, Harry Kim's like, this is my ship, but it's not really my ship. What? And Janeway's just like, yeah, strange is part of the job. I loved it. I think this is one of the best, most exciting uses of sci-fi. You know, weird sci-fi tropes. I don't care if it's not scientifically accurate. It was just so well done. Anyway, let me finally, and thank you for sticking with me if you're still watching this video all the way through, finally get to my number one favorite episode of Star Trek Voyager, and that is Year of Hell. Now, first off, this episode is generally well liked, but not as well as I think it should be. I think there is a small segment of the fan base who don't like this episode for a reason which I think doesn't hold up at all. And that reason is because, it hits the reset button at the end of the episode, so why do I care about anything that happened? And yet, these same people will still champion yesterday's Enterprise as one of the best episodes of Next Generation. And in fact, yesterday's Enterprise does not get any of that bullshit, but it's the exact same thing. It's an alternate timeline that's altered by the end and restored by the end of the episode, so the events of that episode are erased. So I don't get why one would give yesterday's Enterprise a pass and not this episode. And yesterday's Enterprise is one of the best episodes of Next Generation. And this is the best episode of Voyager. I think both of them work. I don't care. I even saw a meme that had like the ship, Anorex's ship from this episode, and right before Voyager was going to slam into it, and it had a giant reset button on it. I mean, I don't know. I guess that's fair, but I really am so against that complaint that, this is just resetting everything, so who cares? No. Because even though it is resetting the events, it's not really true that they never occurred, because they did occur. Alright, let me put it to you this way, because Anorex, if Voyager never encountered Anorex, he would continue going around killing species, wiping them out. Because Voyager was able to overcome him and defeat him, they were able to put a stop for him and make it so that actually never happened. So they actually did do something good, and if they weren't there to do it, then he would go around wiping out entire species from existence. So it did, in that sense, it did actually happen. Also, how the crew reacts, that's how they would react. That we get to see what the crew would actually be like if they were put in a situation like this. I mean, I don't begrudge them for erasing it by the end of the episode, because you can't have Voyager destroyed. You need the show. Although I do agree with Ronald D. Moore, who said the entire show should have been like this. And it was the original premise for them to do a season-long story arc where the ship was under constant attack. But again, the producers suck. Rick Berman, fuck you. Sticking the mud's like, no, you can't do that. And they actually did end up doing this pretty much for season 3 of Enterprise. And so it would have been great if they did to have one continuous season here. But still, the fact that they did it in a two-parter, that we still got a two-part of it, was amazing. And it's just the character interactions between the different, like seeing like the Doctor having to slam the door on people and that basically killed him, and how the crew reacts to the ship being freaking destroyed. And in the second part, they're stuck in an impossible situation. Chakotay and Paris have been abducted. They just had the skeleton crew, and they have to pull together to try to, gain allies, which I wish we would have seen more of, but, still good. Gain allies to take on this almost unstoppable. And freaking Kurtwood Smith is such a good actor. He was so amazing in this episode as Anorex. It was just so well done. And what really does it for me is the scene at the end where Janeway is, they're about to take on Anorex, and Janeway is going to stay on Voyager, even though they all know that Voyager is not going to survive this attack, regardless of whether or not they're successful. Voyager's in such bad shape, there's no way that she is going to survive. And Tuvok says this, it's like, you don't owe anything to this ship. It's just a collection of bulkheads. And she's like, no, you're wrong. Voyager has been our home. It's our place. And it needs someone. And more than that, it's more than just her attaching to a physical thing. It's more of her devotion to seeing this through and wanting to make sure that she's willing to give her whole life. And she basically is saying goodbye to Tuvok. Because she knows she's going to die. And the music that was in this scene, I got to bring it up, was some of the best. It's just the whole way the scene was played out was amazing. And then, of course, it was talk about badass Janeway moments at the end, where she says, this is 1 year I'd like to forget. And she crashes her ship into Anorex's ship and says, time's up. Bit Schwarzenegger of her, but I love it. Oh man, amazing episode. One of the best of the entire Star Trek franchise. My favorite episode of Voyager. Anyway, that is it. Finally, over my top 50. I got through all 50. My favorite episodes of Star Trek Voyager. Thank you guys so much for watching, sticking with me through the end to my Voyager. I have now completed my coverage of Star Trek Voyager. I wanted to end on a high note. My 50 favorite episodes. So yes, I'm now done with Voyager. I will now move on to greener pastures, Babylon 5. It's funny, I went to my local video store to rent, because I heard some people in the comment section saying, I don't know how I'm going to watch Babylon 5 because it doesn't really have it on any streaming services, and I don't really want to buy the whole DVD. And I was thinking to myself, well, I live in New Zealand and we still have video, DVD hire stores, so I'll just go down to the video store and rent it. So, I'll be able to rent it every week. So I go to the video store. I see big closing down, going out of business. So I guess New Zealand's finally catching up to the rest of the world where all the video stores are going out of business. So then I was like, oh, shit. But then they're selling the products. So I thought I was going to have to pay $10 a week to rent each season. But I found out they're selling it for $10 for each season. So I bought all 5 seasons, even though this week probably couldn't afford it. But fuck it, I didn't want to risk anyone else getting there and buying because there's only one copy. So I now have, this is the second season, this is the third season. So anyway, now I have all 5 seasons of Babylon 5. So I will begin watching it shortly, and I'll start my reviews next month. We'll do 1 season a month, just like I did with Voyager. And I'll probably do these best episodes, worst episode thing as well. So, Babylon 5 fans, here you go. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. I will continue for those who care more about Star Trek, I will continue my coverage of Star Trek as well. Random Star Trek episode reviews and stuff like that. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.